The rushing waters of the Rio Pecos swept past with deadly force as Marianne Sinclair's desperate scream pierced the afternoon air, her golden retriever's head barely visible in the churning current. It was 1875 in Fort Sumner, New Mexico Territory, a place where the land was as unforgiving as it was beautiful, and on this particular spring day the river had claimed its newest victims. "Bear, hold on, boy," Marianne cried, kicking off her boots and hitching up her skirts without a second thought before plunging into the freezing water. Owen Sullivan had been tracking a stray calf along the riverbank when he heard the commotion. Dropping his lasso, he spurred his horse forward, arriving just in time to see a woman with copper-colored hair disappear into the swollen river after what looked like a large dog. "Damn fool woman," he muttered, but there wasn't a moment to waste. He threw off his hat, gun, belt, and boots, and dove in after them both. The water hit him like 1,000 knives. Spring runoff from the mountains had turned the normally placid Pecos into a raging beast, and Owen could feel the current immediately trying to drag him under. Years of breaking wild horses had given him strength, but the river was stronger still. He caught sight of the woman ahead, her arm outstretched toward her dog, both being carried downstream at an alarming rate. "Grab something." He shouted above the roar of the water, powerful strokes bringing him closer to them. "The dog will follow you." Either she didn't hear him or chose to ignore his advice because she continued to fight against the current, trying to reach her pet. Owen swore under his breath and redoubled his efforts, finally managing to catch up to her just as she got hold of the dog's collar. "I've got him," she cried triumphantly, but the victory was short-lived as a submerged branch caught her dress, yanking her beneath the surface. Owen dove after her, the frigid water burning his lungs. His fingers found fabric and he pulled hard, bringing both the woman and her dog up for air. They broke the surface with desperate gasps, the dog whimpering and pawing at the water while the woman coughed violently. "Hold on to me," Owen commanded, wrapping one arm around her waist while she clutched her dog with the other. They were being swept farther downstream, away from Fort Sumner and toward rougher waters. Owen spotted a low-hanging cottonwood branch and made his decision. "When I say now, grab that branch." The woman nodded, her face pale but determined. As they approached the branch, Owen used the last of his strength to propel them toward it. "Now," he shouted. Her hand shot out, fingers grasping the rough bark. The sudden stop nearly tore the dog from her grip, but somehow she held on. Owen grabbed the branch too, and together they hung there, the current trying to rip them away. "Pull yourself up," he instructed, helping to boost the dog onto the bank first. The retriever scrambled up, shaking water from its golden coat before barking anxiously at its owner. With tremendous effort, Owen helped the woman onto solid ground before hauling himself out of the river. They collapsed on the grassy bank, soaked and shivering, staring at the sky as they caught their breath. "Thank you," she finally managed between chattering teeth. "You saved our lives." Owen turned his head to look at her properly for the first time. Despite being drenched and bedraggled, she was striking green eyes bright against her fair skin, that copper hair plastered to her head, and a scattering of freckles across her nose. She wasn't from around here. Her accent carried the refined tones of someone from back east. "What kind of fool jumps into the Pecos during spring flood for a dog?" he asked, though there was no real heat in his words. "The kind who loves her dog more than she fears death," she replied simply, sitting up to check on the animal. The golden retriever nudged her hand with his nose, seemingly unharmed despite the ordeal. "Bear is all I have left of my brother," Owen sighed, pushing himself to his feet. "We're a good mile from town now. Can you walk?" "I believe so," she said, but when she tried to stand, her legs gave way beneath her. "Perhaps not quite yet. I'll get my horse," he said, realizing they were close to where he'd left his mount. "Stay put." When he returned riding his chestnut gelding, the woman was sitting with her arms wrapped around her dog, both still dripping wet. "Miss Sinclair, Marianne Sinclair," she supplied, looking up at him. "And you are Owen Sullivan." He extended his hand down to her. "Come on, Miss Sinclair." Let's get you and your dog back to town before you catch your death." She hesitated only briefly before taking his hand, allowing him to pull her up behind him on the horse. The dog trotted alongside them as Owen guided his mount back toward Fort Sumner. "You're new to these parts," he observed, feeling her shivering against his back. "I arrived last week," she confirmed. "My uncle owns the mercantile. I've come to help him run it after my aunt's passing." "Ah, old Sam Townsend's niece," Owen nodded in understanding. "He mentioned you were coming." "You know my uncle." "Everyone knows everyone in Fort Sumner, Miss Sinclair. You'll learn that soon enough." As they approached the town, Owen couldn't help but wonder what had brought this Eastern woman to their dusty corner of the territory. Fort Sumner had once been an army post, but was now mostly a small settlement where ranchers, traders, and the occasional outlaw passed through. It wasn't a place where refined women like Marianne Sinclair typically chose to stay. What he didn't know was that this wouldn't be the last time their paths crossed, nor the last time he'd find himself coming to her rescue. The Rio Pecos had brought them together, but life in the New Mexico territory would forge a bond neither of them could have anticipated. Upon reaching town, Marian's uncle rushed out of his store, his face etched with worry. "Mary, good heavens, child, what happened to you?" "Bear got away from me, Uncle Sam," she explained as Owen helped her down from his horse. "He went into the river and I went after him. Mr. Sullivan here saved us both." Sam Townsend looked up at Owen with genuine gratitude. "Sullivan, I'm in your debt. Please come inside. Let me offer you some dry clothes and a hot meal at least." Owen hesitated. He wasn't one for socializing, preferring the solitude of his small ranch outside town. But the pleading look in Marian's eyes as she stood shivering beside her uncle made his decision for him. "Much obliged, Mr. Townsend," he said, dismounting and tying his horse to the hitching post. "I could use something warm." The mercantile was the largest building in Fort Sumner aside from the old military barracks. Half of it served as the store, while the other half was living quarters for the Townsend family. Sam ushered them inside, calling for his housekeeper to bring towels and to stoke the fire. "Maria, prepare a hot bath for my niece," he instructed the older Hispanic woman who emerged from the back room, "and find some of my clothes for Mr. Sullivan." Marianne excused herself to change, Bear following close at her heels, still unwilling to leave her side after their ordeal. Owen accepted the towel offered to him and stood awkwardly by the fire, aware of how out of place he felt in the well-appointed living quarters. "Sullivan," Sam began, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey and handing one to Owen, "I don't know how to thank you properly." Owen shook his head. "No need for thanks, Mr. Townsend. Anyone would have done the same." "Not true," Sam argued. "Most men would have thought twice before jumping into the Pecos this time of year. That river's taken many a good soul." Owen sipped the whiskey, letting the warmth spread through him. "Your niece didn't seem to think twice either." Sam chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "Marian's always been headstrong. Her father, my late brother, indulged her too much after her mother passed. Let her run wild with her brother Andrew, then Andrew died in the war and well, he trailed off taking a long drink. She's been through a lot." Owen nodded, understanding loss all too well himself. "She said the dog was her brother's." "Yes, that mutt's the last thing she has of him. Bear's been with her since Andrew first sent him home from Virginia." Sam sighed heavily. "I'm grateful you were there, Sullivan. I couldn't bear to lose her too." Before Owen could respond, Marianne reappeared wearing a simple blue dress, her damp hair braided over one shoulder. The color brought out the green in her eyes, making them look like jade. She smiled tentatively at Owen. "Mr. Sullivan, I can't thank you enough," she said, approaching him. "Uncle Sam tells me you're a rancher." "That's right," Owen confirmed, suddenly conscious of his rough appearance compared to her neat one. "Small spread about 3 miles west of town." "Well, you must join us for supper," she insisted. "It's the least we can do." Owen started to decline but found himself accepting instead. "I'd be honored, Miss Sinclair." They ate in the small dining room behind the store a hearty stew with fresh bread that Maria had prepared. Throughout the meal, Owen found himself watching Marianne, intrigued by the way she spoke of books and ideas with such passion. She was clearly educated, yet there was a practicality to her that seemed at odds with her refined manner. "What brought you to Fort Sumner, if you don't mind my asking?" Owen inquired as Maria served apple pie for dessert. Marianne's expression flickered briefly before she composed herself. "After my father passed last year, there wasn't much keeping me in Philadelphia. Uncle Sam wrote that he needed help with the store since Aunt Helen's death, and I needed a change." There was more to the story. Owen could sense it in the careful way she chose her words, but he didn't press. Everyone in the West had something they were running from or toward. It wasn't his place to pry. After dinner, Owen retrieved his now dry clothes and prepared to leave. Sam pressed a bottle of good whiskey into his hands as thanks, while Marianne walked him to the door, Bear at her side. "Mr. Sullivan," she said softly as they reached the entrance, "I truly am grateful for what you did today." "Bear is, well, he's family." Owen nodded, understanding. "He's a good dog, worth saving." He paused, then added, "As were you, Miss Sinclair." A blush colored her cheeks, making her freckles stand out. "Will you come by the store sometime? I'd like to repay your kindness properly." "I'll be in town next week for supplies," he said, placing his hat back on his head. "Good evening, Miss Sinclair." As he rode home in the gathering darkness, Owen couldn't shake the image of copper hair and green eyes from his mind. Fort Sumner had just become a bit more interesting. True to his word, Owen returned to town the following week. His small ranch kept him busy, but he found himself making excuses to head into Fort Sumner more often than usual. Each time he would stop by Townsend's Mercantile, ostensibly for supplies, but more truthfully for the chance to see Marianne Sinclair. She was always there, either helping customers or organizing inventory, her capable hands making quick work of whatever task was before her. Bear would lie near the door, keeping watch, but would thump his tail enthusiastically whenever Owen entered. "Mr. Sullivan," she greeted him on one such visit, smiling warmly. "What can I help you with today?" "Just coffee and some ammunition," he replied, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "How are you settling in, Miss Sinclair?" "Quite well, thank you," she said, leading him to the appropriate shelves. "Though I must admit, Fort Sumner is quite different from Philadelphia." "I imagine so," Owen agreed, watching as she measured out coffee beans. "No fancy theaters or grand balls out here," Marianne laughed, the sound brightening the dusty store. "I don't miss those as much as I thought I would. There's an honesty to life here that's refreshing." Owen raised an eyebrow. "Even with the dust storms, rattlesnakes, and cattle rustlers." "Perhaps not those," she conceded with a grin. "But I do enjoy the openness of the land, the way the sky seems endless, and the people are genuine if a bit rough around the edges." Her gaze met his directly, and Owen felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. He cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "We have our moments," he said gruffly, accepting the package of coffee she handed him. "Though I'd wager you found Fort Sumner lacking in eligible gentlemen compared to back east." Something flickered in her eyes, pain, perhaps, or memory. "I didn't come west looking for a husband, Mr. Sullivan. I've had quite enough of that particular pursuit." Before he could inquire further, the bell above the door jingled as another customer entered. Marianne excused herself, leaving Owen to ponder her words as he selected his ammunition. Over the next month, Owen found more and more reasons to visit town. Sometimes he would bring fresh game for the Townsend's table, other times he would offer to help with repairs around the store. Sam seemed to appreciate his presence, often inviting him to stay for a meal, during which Owen would learn more about Marianne's life back east. She had been engaged, he discovered, to a banker's son in Philadelphia. The engagement had ended abruptly just before her father's death, though neither Marianne nor Sam elaborated on the circumstances. Whatever had happened, it had clearly left its mark on her. One evening in late June, Owen arrived at the mercantile to find Marianne alone, balancing the books at the counter. Bear greeted him enthusiastically, and Marianne looked up with a smile that made his heart beat faster. "Uncle Sam's gone to Las Vegas for supplies," she explained. "He won't be back until tomorrow." Owen nodded, suddenly aware of the impropriety of being alone with her. "I should come back then, actually," she interrupted. "I was hoping you might escort me on a walk. I've been cooped up in here all day and Bear needs the exercise." Against his better judgment, Owen agreed. They strolled through town as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dirt street. Bear trotted ahead, occasionally stopping to investigate something of canine interest. "You never speak of your family, Mr. Sullivan," Marianne observed as they walked. "Do they live nearby?" Owen's jaw tightened. "No family to speak of anymore. My parents died of cholera when I was 16. No siblings." "I'm sorry," she said softly, genuine compassion in her voice. "It must have been difficult." "Life is difficult for most people out here," he replied with a shrug. "I enlisted in the Union Army after they passed, fought for a few years, then came west when the war ended, worked cattle drives until I saved enough to buy my own place." Marianne was quiet for a moment before saying, "You've made something of yourself, though. That takes courage, or stubbornness," he countered, but her words pleased him nonetheless. They had reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open rangeland. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, the distant mountains purple against the horizon. "It's beautiful," Marianne breathed, stopping to take in the view. Owen found himself watching her instead of the sunset, captivated by the way the golden light illuminated her features. "Yes," he agreed quietly, "it is." She turned to him then, catching him staring. Instead of looking away, he held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "Mr. Sullivan," she began. "Owen," he corrected her. "I think we've known each other long enough for that." A small smile played at her lips. "Owen, then, and you must call me Marianne." "Marianne," he repeated, liking the way her name felt on his tongue. Bear suddenly barked, breaking the moment as he chased after a rabbit. Marianne laughed, calling him back, and they turned to walk toward town again, the spell broken but not forgotten. That night, lying in his bed at the ranch, Owen stared at the ceiling and wondered what he was doing. Marianne Sinclair was educated, refined, and despite her claims to the contrary, surely destined for more than a hardscrabble life in the New Mexico territory. Women like her didn't end up with men like him, rough cowboys with calloused hands and little to offer beyond a small ranch and a lifetime of hard work. And yet, he couldn't stop thinking about her. The summer progressed, bringing scorching heat to Fort Sumner. The Rio Pecos shrank to a more manageable size, its waters calm enough now that Marianne would occasionally take Bear there to swim, though she was always careful to stay in the shallows. Owen continued his visits to town, and as July turned to August, he found himself spending more time with Marianne. They would ride together on Sunday afternoons, exploring the countryside around Fort Sumner. He showed her hidden waterfalls and ancient Native American drawings on canyon walls. She taught him card games she had learned in Philadelphia and read to him from books she had brought west. One evening, as they sat on the mercantile's back porch watching the stars come out, Marianne asked about his ranch. "It's nothing impressive," he told her honestly. 200 acres, a small herd of cattle, decent grazing land. The cabin needs work, but it's solid. "It sounds wonderful," she said, genuine interest in her voice. "I'd like to see it someday." Owen hesitated. Having Marianne at his ranch, seeing his humble home, it felt like crossing a line he wasn't sure he should cross. "Perhaps," he said noncommittally, but the hope in her eyes made him reconsider. "Actually, there's a social at the schoolhouse next Saturday. If you'd allow me to escort you, we could ride past the ranch on our way." The smile that lit up her face was worth any discomfort he felt. "I'd be delighted, Owen." The night of the social arrived, and Owen spent more time than he'd ever admit getting ready. He bathed in the creek near his cabin, shaved carefully, and put on his best shirt, the one without patches or faded spots. He'd even ridden to Las Vegas the day before to buy a new bandana, dark blue to match his eyes, according to the shopkeeper who had been all too happy to help a nervous cowboy pick out something to impress a lady. When he arrived at the mercantile to collect Marianne, Sam met him at the door with a knowing look. "She's been fussing over her appearance all afternoon," Sam informed him with a chuckle. "Haven't seen her this excited about anything since she arrived." Owen shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Townsend, I want you to know my intentions toward your niece are—" Sam held up a hand. "Save it, Sullivan. I've seen how you look at her, and more importantly, how she looks at you. Just treat her right. She's had enough disappointment for one lifetime." Before Owen could respond, Marianne appeared, wearing a dress the color of sage that made her eyes sparkle. Her copper hair was arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck, with a few tendrils framing her face. "You look beautiful," Owen said, the words escaping before he could think better of them. A blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." Bear whined from behind her, clearly disappointed to be left behind. "Next time, boy," she promised, scratching his ears. "You'd cause too much trouble at a dance." The ride to Owen's ranch was filled with comfortable conversation. Marianne asked questions about his cattle operation, listening intently as he explained the challenges and rewards of ranching in the territory. "It's not an easy life," he admitted as they approached his property. "But it's mine. Built it with these two hands." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and Marianne smiled at him warmly. "That's something to be proud of, Owen, creating something from nothing." His cabin came into view, a simple structure built of pine logs with a small porch across the front. It wasn't much compared to the homes she must have known in Philadelphia, but Owen had built it himself, expanding it over the years as he could afford to. "It's lovely," Marianne said, genuine appreciation in her voice as they rode past. "So peaceful here. It can be lonely," he found himself admitting, "but the quiet has its merits." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of kindred spirits, despite their different backgrounds. The social at the schoolhouse was already in full swing when they arrived. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the proceedings. A small band played lively tunes in the corner, and couples whirled around the makeshift dance floor. "Miss Sinclair, you've come." Mrs. Peterson, the schoolteacher, greeted them warmly. "And with Mr. Sullivan, no less. We hardly ever see him at these gatherings." Marianne smiled, taking the older woman's hands in greeting. "I managed to convince him it would be worth his while." "Indeed," Mrs. Peterson said with a knowing look before moving on to welcome other arrivals. Owen felt out of place among the townspeople, most of whom were dressed in their Sunday best. He rarely attended social functions, preferring the solitude of his ranch to the noise and bustle of gatherings. But then Marianne took his arm, smiling up at him with such warmth that his discomfort faded. "Shall we dance?" she asked. "I'm not much of a dancer," he warned her as he led her to the floor. "Just follow my lead," she whispered, placing one hand on his shoulder and taking his other hand in hers. To his surprise, Owen found himself enjoying the dancing. Marianne was light on her feet and patient with his occasional missteps. As the evening wore on, he relaxed, even accepting a cup of punch from the refreshment table and engaging in conversation with some of the townspeople he normally avoided. "You're a natural," Marianne teased as they took a break from dancing. "Are you sure you haven't been hiding your dancing skills all along?" "Only because I have an excellent partner," he replied, enjoying the way her eyes lit up at the compliment. Later, as they danced to a slower tune, Owen found the courage to hold her closer than propriety strictly allowed. Marianne didn't pull away. Instead, she rested her head lightly against his shoulder. "Thank you for bringing me tonight," she murmured. "I haven't enjoyed myself this much in a very long time." Owen's heart thundered in his chest, and he wondered if she could feel it. "Nor have I," he admitted. The ride back to town was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the mercantile, Owen helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. "I should go in," Marianne said softly, though she made no move to leave. "Uncle Sam will be waiting up." "Of course," Owen agreed, but he didn't step back. They stood there in the moonlight, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Finally, Owen reached up to brush a stray lock of hair from her cheek, his touch gentle. "Marianne," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm not a man of many words, but I want you to know." The mercantile door opened suddenly, flooding the street with lamplight. Sam stood in the doorway, Bear pushing past him to greet Marianne enthusiastically. "There you are," Sam called, was beginning to worry. The moment broken, Owen stepped back, tipping his hat to Marianne. "Good night, Miss Sinclair." "Good night, Mr. Sullivan," she replied formally, though her eyes held a promise that made his heart leap. "Thank you for a wonderful evening." As he rode back to his ranch under the star-filled sky, Owen knew he was in trouble. Marianne Sinclair had somehow worked her way into his heart, and he wasn't sure he wanted her to leave. September brought cooler temperatures to Fort Sumner, along with the annual cattle drive to the railhead in Las Vegas. Owen would be gone for nearly 2 weeks, a prospect that suddenly seemed unbearable now that Marianne had become such a central part of his life. The day before he was set to leave, he rode into town to say goodbye. He found her in the back of the store inventorying supplies. "Owen," she greeted him with a bright smile that faltered when she saw his expression. "You're leaving." "The drive starts tomorrow," he confirmed. "I'll be gone about 2 weeks if all goes well." Marianne nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course, will you be careful?" "Always am," he assured her, touched by her concern. "I brought something for Bear while I'm gone." He produced a bone from his saddlebag, wrapped in paper. "So he doesn't forget me." "As if he could," Marianne said softly. "He adores you almost as much as." She stopped herself, a blush spreading across her cheeks. Owen's heart raced at her near admission. "Marianne," he said, taking a step closer to her, "when I get back, there's something I'd like to discuss with you, something important." Her eyes widened slightly. "I'll be here," she promised, waiting. Before he could lose his nerve, Owen leaned down and pressed a brief, tender kiss to her cheek. "Until then," he murmured, then turned and left before she could see the emotion on his face. The cattle drive was grueling, as it always was. Long days in the saddle, sleeping on hard ground, dealing with spooked cattle and unpredictable weather. But this time, Owen had something to look forward to, someone waiting for his return. The thought of Marianne kept him going through the hardest days. When they finally reached Las Vegas and sold the cattle, Owen declined the customary celebrations with the other cowboys. Instead, he bought a small silver pendant in the shape of a dog, a gift for Marianne to commemorate their first meeting, and began the journey back to Fort Sumner a day earlier than planned. He rode through the night, eager to return, and reached town just as dawn was breaking. The streets were quiet, most residents still abed, but smoke rose from the chimney of the mercantile. Sam was an early riser, always starting the day with a pot of strong coffee. Owen tethered his horse outside and knocked softly, not wanting to disturb any customers who might be staying in the rooms upstairs. To his surprise, it was Marianne who opened the door, still in her dressing gown with her hair loose around her shoulders. "Owen," she exclaimed, her face lighting up. "You're back early." Before he could respond, Bear bounded up, nearly knocking him over in his enthusiasm. Owen laughed, patting the dog's head. "Missed you too, boy." "Come in," Marianne urged, suddenly conscious of her state of undress. I need to change. Uncle Sam's in the back. He'll be glad to see you." She hurried upstairs, leaving Owen in the store with a still excited Bear. Sam emerged from the back room, coffee cup in hand. "Sullivan," he greeted with a nod. "Didn't expect you back so soon. Drive go well." "Well enough," Owen confirmed, accepting the cup of coffee Sam poured for him. "Got a good price for the cattle." Sam studied him over the rim of his cup. "You didn't ride through the night just to tell me about cattle prices." Owen met the older man's gaze steadily. "No, sir, I did not." Before more could be said, Marianne reappeared, now properly dressed in a simple blue gown, her hair hastily braided over one shoulder. The sight of her made Owen's heart skip a beat. "Uncle Sam," she said, her eyes never leaving Owen's face, "would you mind if Owen and I took a walk? I'd like to hear about his journey." Sam looked between them, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. "Go on, then. But remember, this is a small town with big ears, so mind your reputation, young lady." Marianne blushed but nodded, grabbing her shawl from a hook by the door. Bear followed them out, tail wagging happily at the prospect of a morning walk. They strolled toward the edge of town, neither speaking until they were beyond the last buildings. The morning was cool, mist rising from the distant river as the sun climbed higher. "I missed you," Marianne said finally, breaking the silence. "More than I thought possible." Owen stopped walking, turning to face her. "I thought of you every day," he admitted. "Every night, looking up at the stars, knowing you were under the same sky." Her eyes softened at his words. "That doesn't sound like the taciturn cowboy I first met." "He's still here," Owen said with a small smile. "Just found something worth using his words for." Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out the silver pendant. "I brought you something, to remember the day we met." Marianne gasped softly as he placed the small silver dog in her palm. "Owen, it's beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you," he said, the words coming easier now. "Marianne, I'm not a wealthy man. My ranch is small, the work is hard, and I can't offer you the kind of life you had in Philadelphia. But everything I have is yours if you want it." Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Owen Sullivan?" He took her hands in his, the silver pendant caught between their palms. "I love you, Marianne Sinclair. I think I have since the moment I saw you dive into that river after your dog. Will you marry me?" Instead of answering immediately, Marianne stood on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was sweet and tender at first, then deepened as Owen's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Marianne's eyes were shining. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, I will marry you." Bear barked happily, as if understanding the significance of the moment, and they both laughed, the joy of their engagement bubbling over. "There's something you should know," Marianne said as they began walking again, her hand firmly clasped in his. "About why I left Philadelphia." Owen squeezed her hand encouragingly. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." "I want to," she assured him. "You deserve to know." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I was engaged before to a man named Harold Blackwell. He was from a good family, the kind my father approved of. But I discovered he was only interested in my father's shipping business. When father died and the business had to be sold to pay his debts, Harold broke our engagement." Anger flared in Owen's chest at the thought of anyone hurting her. "His loss," he said firmly. "Though I can't say I'm sorry he was such a fool." Marianne smiled up at him, gratitude in her eyes. "Nor am I now. Coming west was the best decision I ever made." They returned to the mercantile to share their news with Sam, who pretended surprise, but immediately produced a bottle of good whiskey to celebrate. Word spread quickly through the small town, and by evening it seemed everyone in Fort Sumner knew that Owen Sullivan and Marianne Sinclair were to be married. Mrs. Peterson insisted on hosting a small engagement party the following weekend, and though Owen would have preferred something more private, he couldn't deny Marianne the chance to celebrate with the friends she'd made in town. The weeks leading up to their wedding were busy ones. Owen spent every spare moment adding a second room to his cabin and building proper furniture to replace his bachelor furnishings. Marianne divided her time between helping at the mercantile and preparing for married life, sewing curtains and quilts for their home. They were married on a crisp October morning in 1875, with the Sangre de Cristo Mountains providing a majestic backdrop to the ceremony. The entire town turned out for the occasion, filling the small church to capacity. Bear served as ring-bearer, the bands tied carefully to his collar as he trotted down the aisle ahead of the bride. Marianne was radiant in a cream-colored dress that Sam had ordered specially from Santa Fe, her copper hair adorned with wildflowers gathered that morning. Owen, standing at the altar in a new suit that felt stiff and uncomfortable, forgot his discomfort the moment he saw her walking toward him on her uncle's arm. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Owen barely heard the words, lost in Marianne's eyes as they pledged their lives to one another. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister announced finally. "You may kiss your bride." Owen didn't need to be told twice. He gathered Marianne in his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise he held in his heart. The congregation erupted in cheers and Bear barked excitedly, making everyone laugh. The celebration afterward was held in the town square, with tables laden with food contributed by every household in Fort Sumner. There was dancing and singing, and more than a few toasts to the happy couple. As the sun began to set, Owen found a moment alone with his new wife, drawing her away from the festivities to a quiet corner. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, savoring the sound of her new name. "Are you ready to see your new home?" Marianne's eyes sparkled with happiness. "I've been ready since the day you proposed." They slipped away from the celebration, amid good-natured teasing from the townspeople. Bear bounded ahead of them as they rode to the ranch, now their ranch, where they would begin their life together. The cabin looked different in the fading light, more like a home than Owen had ever seen it. Marianne had visited several times during their engagement, bringing small touches that transformed the rustic structure. Curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the bed, a shelf for her books. Owen lifted her from the saddle when they arrived, carrying her across the threshold despite her laughing protests. Bear rushed in ahead of them, immediately claiming his spot before the fireplace. "Welcome home, Mrs. Sullivan," Owen said softly, setting her on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "It's perfect," she whispered, looking around the cabin that was now theirs. "Everything is perfect." As night fell, they stood on the porch together, Bear at their feet, looking out at the land that stretched before them. The challenges would be many harsh winters, dry summers, the constant work of maintaining a ranch in the unforgiving territory. But facing them together made them seem less daunting. "Do you ever regret it?" Owen asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Leaving Philadelphia for this?" Marianne looked up at him, love shining in her eyes. "Not for a single moment. This is where I belong with you, with Bear, in this wild, beautiful place." He kissed her then, under the vast New Mexico sky, grateful beyond words that a woman and her dog had been swept into a river on that spring day, changing all their lives forever. The years passed, each one bringing new challenges and joys to the Sullivan Ranch. Their first winter as a married couple was harsh, with blizzards that left them snowbound for days at a time. But the snug cabin, warmed by the fireplace and their love for one another, became a haven against the elements. Marianne proved herself remarkably adaptable to ranch life. She learned to ride like a local, to garden in the difficult soil, to preserve food for the winter months. Her Eastern education came in handy too. She kept meticulous records of the ranch's finances, helping them slowly expand their holdings and increase their herd. Bear remained their faithful companion, though he began to show his age as their second anniversary approached. He moved more slowly, but still insisted on following Marianne everywhere, especially when she began to show signs of pregnancy in the spring of 1877. "He's being protective," Owen observed one evening as Bear positioned himself at Marianne's feet while she sewed beside the fire. "Knows you're carrying precious cargo." Marianne smiled, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her stomach. "He's always been sensitive that way. Remember how he wouldn't leave my side after I fell from lightning last year?" Owen remembered all too well. The spirited mare had been spooked by a rattlesnake, throwing Marianne before bolting. Though she'd escaped with only bruises, Bear had appointed himself her guardian, refusing to let her out of his sight until she was fully recovered. Their first child, a son they named Samuel Andrew Sullivan after both their families, was born on a warm September evening in 1877. The birth was difficult, leaving Marianne exhausted but triumphant as she cradled their newborn son. "He has your eyes," she whispered to Owen, who sat beside the bed, awestruck by the tiny life they had created. "And your spirit, I'd wager," Owen replied, gently touching his son's downy head. "God help us all." Bear was cautiously introduced to the baby the next day, sniffing curiously, before giving the infant's face a gentle lick of approval. From that moment on, he appointed himself the child's guardian, sleeping beside the cradle Owen had crafted and alerting them whenever young Sam cried. Life settled into a new rhythm as they adjusted to parenthood. Marianne proved as capable a mother as she was a rancher's wife, managing the household and child with the same efficiency she brought to everything. Owen found himself falling in love with her all over again as he watched her with their son. When Sam was 2, they made their first trip back east to introduce him to Marianne's remaining family in Philadelphia. It was Owen's first time in a big city, and he felt out of place among the cobblestone streets and elegant townhouses. But seeing the joy on Marianne's face as she reconnected with old friends and family made the discomfort worthwhile. "Your husband is quite rustic," he overheard one of her cousins comment during a dinner party held in their honor. "Yes, isn't he wonderful?" Marianne had replied without a hint of self-consciousness. "The finest man I've ever known." Later that night, in the privacy of their guest room, Owen had pulled her into his arms. "Did you mean what you said to your cousin, about me being the finest man you've known?" Marianne had looked up at him, surprise in her eyes. "Of course I did. Why would you doubt it?" "Because I'm standing here in borrowed clothes, trying not to break anything in this fancy house, while you fit in so naturally," he admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if you miss all this." Her expression had softened then. "Owen Sullivan, I have never once regretted choosing you and our life together. Yes, there are things from my old life that I occasionally miss: hot baths without having to heat the water myself, for instance." Her eyes twinkled with humor before turning serious again, "but nothing here could replace what we've built together." The trip had been illuminating for both of them, reminding Marianne of what she had left behind, but also confirming that her heart truly belonged in New Mexico with Owen and their growing family. They returned to Fort Sumner just before Christmas, in time for Bear's final days. The old dog, who had been left in Sam Townsend's care during their journey, had grown frail in their absence. He rallied briefly upon their return, greeting them with a thump of his tail but lacking the energy to rise from his bed before the fire. "He was waiting for you," Sam said quietly. "Wouldn't let go until you came home." For 3 days, Bear remained with them, accepting gentle pats from young Sam and keeping watch over the family he loved. On the 4th morning, Marianne found him gone, having passed peacefully in the night. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with the river visible in the distance. Owen carved a simple marker from pine: "Bear, faithful friend, brave heart." "He brought us together," Marianne said, wiping tears from her cheeks as they stood beside the grave. "If he hadn't gone into that river, then I'd have found some other excuse to meet you," Owen assured her, his arm around her shoulders. "Some things are meant to be, Marianne." The following spring brought both grief and joy. Sam Townsend passed away after a brief illness, leaving the mercantile to Marianne. After much discussion, they decided to sell the store rather than try to manage it alongside the ranch. The proceeds allowed them to expand their property and build a larger house to accommodate their growing family. In 1880, they welcomed twin daughters, Elizabeth Helen and Catherine Rose. The girls had their mother's copper hair and their father's blue eyes, a combination that Owen jokingly predicted would give him gray hair before they reached courting age. "You'll be cleaning your rifle on the porch when their suitors come calling," Marianne teased as she nursed the infants. "Damn right I will," Owen confirmed, making her laugh. The 1880s brought prosperity to the Sullivan Ranch. Owen's careful management and Marianne's business acumen helped them weather the droughts and economic downturns that drove many smaller ranchers out of the territory. They added a large barn, expanded their herd, and hired several hands to help with the increasing workload. Young Sam grew into a thoughtful boy with his mother's love of books and his father's affinity for the land. The twins were as different as sisters could be: Elizabeth quiet and observant, Catherine bold and adventurous. A fourth child, Michael Owen, arrived in 1885, completing their family. Through it all, Owen and Marianne's love for each other deepened. The passion of their early days matured into a partnership of equals, each respecting the other's strengths and supporting their weaknesses. They disagreed at times, Marianne's progressive Eastern ideas occasionally clashing with Owen's more traditional views, but they always found their way back to common ground. In 1890, as New Mexico's push for statehood gained momentum, Marianne became involved in the women's suffrage movement, attending meetings in Santa Fe and corresponding with activists in other territories. Owen supported her endeavors, even when some of their neighbors raised eyebrows at his wife's political activities. "Times are changing," he would say whenever anyone questioned him about it, "and I'd rather have a wife with opinions than one without a mind of her own." As their children grew, so did the legends of how their parents met. The story of the brave woman who jumped into the river after her dog, only to be rescued by a handsome cowboy, became a favorite bedtime tale. "Tell us about Bear and the river again," the twins would beg, even though they'd heard it countless times. "Your mother was the most foolish, brave woman I'd ever seen," Owen would begin, winking at Marianne across the room. "And I knew right then I'd have to marry her, if only to keep her from jumping into any more rivers." "That's not how it happened," Marianne would protest, though her eyes shone with the memory. "Your father was so grumpy when he pulled us from the water. I thought he might lecture me to death before the river had a chance to drown me." On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1895, Owen surprised Marianne with a gift he'd been planning for months: a small golden pendant in the shape of a bear, with a tiny diamond for an eye. "To replace the silver one," he explained as he fastened it around her neck, "and to remember the friend who brought us together." Marianne touched it tenderly. "I still have the silver one," she confessed. "I keep it in my jewelry box. I could never part with it." That night, after their children had presented them with handmade gifts and a special anniversary dinner, Owen and Marianne walked hand in hand to the hillside where Bear was buried. The marker was weathered now, but the words were still legible in the moonlight. "20 years," Owen marveled, putting his arm around his wife's waist. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I saw you splashing into that river. Other times it feels like I've loved you my whole life." Marianne leaned her head against his shoulder. "I never expected to find happiness here, you know. When I left Philadelphia, I thought I was leaving everything behind. Instead, I found everything I needed." "Any regrets?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally, wanting to be sure she was truly content with their life together. "Only that we won't have another 20 years together," she replied softly. "Or another 50. No matter how long we have, it won't be enough." Owen turned her in his arms, looking down at the face he knew better than his own, lined now with years of laughter and worry, but still beautiful to him. "Then we'd better make the most of the time we have, Mrs. Sullivan." "I intend to, Mr. Sullivan," she promised, reaching up to trace the silver in his once dark hair. "Starting right now." Their kiss, illuminated by the New Mexico moon, held all the tenderness of young love and all the depth of a partnership forged through years of joy and hardship. Above them, the stars burned bright in the vast western sky, witnesses to a love story that began with a woman, a dog, and a river. In 1912, when New Mexico finally achieved statehood, Owen and Marianne Sullivan celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary. Their ranch had grown into one of the most successful in the county, now primarily run by their sons Sam and Michael. Their daughters had homes of their own: Elizabeth, married to a doctor in Santa Fe, Catherine running a small newspaper in Las Vegas, on warm evenings, Owen and Marianne would still sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. They would sometimes speak of Bear, of the river, of the twist of fate that had brought them together all those years ago. "Do you think he knew?" Marianne would wonder. "That by jumping into that river he was changing all our lives." And Owen, taking her hand in his as he had thousands of times before, would smile and say, "Some things are just meant to be, my love. Some things are just meant to be."